Well, welcome back to Tip of the Spear with your Missoula County Commissioners. I'm Juanita Vero, and I'm here with my fellow commissioners, Josh Slotnick and Dave Strohmeyer. We're joined today by Andrew Hagemeier, Senior Planner in the Department of Planning, Development, and Sustainability. Thanks for joining us. But real quick, over the summer, the new zoning regulations went into effect, and it was the first update in 50 years. So start us off real quick, Andrew. Like, why does zoning exist? And really paint the picture. What would our community look like if there weren't rules and regulations?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so thanks for having me. I did wear this sweet sweatshirt for you guys, my holiday ugly Snoopy sweatshirt that our listeners can't.
Ugly's a stretch. That is a pretty attractive.
It's a brilliant Gresham blue with some fantastic greens and reds. And
Snoopy's got this kind of wistful, a little bit melancholy, but kind of profound look on it.
Does the zoning in this area allow such a sweatshirt as that?
I think so, yeah. You know, it is the holidays, so holiday sweaters are fair game right now. Like during the zoning code, we were working so hard at it, we saw you guys all the time, and I hardly see you at all now, so I thought I would wear a fun sweater.
Nice.
Yeah.
I think we need to have a new project so we get to hang out.
Yeah.
That's the only way I spend time.
We're working on it. Well, I'm sure we got something in the wings here. But yeah, Missoula County, it was a huge milestone. It's a huge lift to update your zoning code. We completely rewrote the code that was originally adopted in 1976. It was long overdue. So at its core, zoning is an entitlement of property rights.
What does that mean, entitlement?
Well, there's an analogy that you learn in planning school, and other people maybe have heard of it too, but it's the bundle of sticks. When you own property, you own a bundle of sticks, and these sticks all have different purposes and different things. So your bundle of sticks might be a water right, or it might not be a water right. A property might have mineral rights, or it might not have mineral rights.
Each one of those rights being a stick.
Is a stick in this analogy. And what zoning does is it gives you a bunch more sticks to put in your bundle. So zoning might say you can have a house, you can have a duplex, you can have a townhome. It might say you can have an ice cream shop. And then if you meet all of the public health and safety standards, the bulk and dimensional requirements like setbacks and building heights, then you have the right to have your ice cream parlor on this property. So that's how it is an entitlement.
So an entitlement means if you have this stick, you are entitled to take action around creating an ice cream shop or a duplex. But if you don't have that stick, you aren't entitled to do that.
Right. Yeah, it's an entitlement. It provides people property rights. The zoning was developed primarily as a tool to protect public health and safety, and it still has a very valuable role in protecting public health and safety, but it's also used to implement a community's vision. And that's probably the most important role of zoning in today's society in the United States. So if a community gets together and says, we want to be this type of community, we want to manage development and growth in these ways, we want to grow that way, not grow in that way, protect farmland over here, have a downtown over here, how you implement that is zoning. There are other tools that could get you partially there, but the main tool is zoning. It's an important, really important aspect of what local governments do in how we grow as a community over time. It allows you to proactively, and if we're getting a little bit more into the details on what zoning can do, is it's pretty important for local governments to how we manage our services and how we connect people to those services. It allows us to proactively think about how we're connecting people to services. So
when you say proactive, I'm guessing you're imagining a future. So 10 years from now, 15 years from now, what are things going to be like? We want to make sure that in 15 years from now, people who live in a certain area don't have to drive 22 miles to get to a grocery store or get their prescriptions filled. And we can attend to those needs on this side of those 15, 20 years through good zoning.
Yes, exactly. More directly in terms of what we as local government control in terms of our budget, things like our infrastructure that the community needs, water, sewer, roads. It also goes to the sheriff, the fire departments, schools. If you are proactive thinking about where growth is going to happen, then you can be ahead of the growth in how you plan for your services and budget for your services. So with zoning, it allows you as a local government to be more efficient with your services, which saves taxpayers money. Without zoning, you're always reacting. You're not being proactive. You're guessing where growth is going to go. You're guessing at what level of services they're going to need. It's inconsistent in the application. It creates problems that later have to be fixed. All those things relate to end up a less efficient use of our tax dollars.
But can you talk a little bit about how zoning has changed? Various zoning philosophies have changed because people's needs or modes of transportation, communication too, but have changed. And how does zoning keep up with that?
Well, if I can just add to what Juanita's bringing up here, with anything we do, it's good to go into it with a fair amount of humility. And I suspect that 50 years ago, folks thought that the zoning that we had in place and enacted was probably a good idea at the time, but may have had unintended consequences over the decades.
Yeah.
So.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So as I said, zoning is a tool to implement your vision. So our zoning, being 50 years old, was implementing a vision from 50 years ago. Whole generations of Missoulians had never gotten to weigh in on what their vision for the community was going to be, and that being translated into actual action.
And in a nutshell, can you describe what that vision was?
Well, it's actually not too different from the way we think today. A lot of the values that we have a community are still here. There's just 50,000 more people. And things that are important for Missoulians in 1974 were ag land conservation, wildlands, wildlife, economic development.
One big thing that wasn't the case in 1974 that is now is this housing crisis.
Yeah.
We weren't on a steep growth curve in 1974, and the cost of housing was pretty affordable when compared to wage levels.
Yeah.
And that whole equation is completely different right now.
Yeah. In 1974, getting back to Juanita's initial question on how zoning evolves and with the community, at that point in time, one of the main purposes of zoning that was the separation of use. At that point in time, the philosophy was we needed to put all the single-family homes in one spot in the community, all the industrial in another spot, all the commercial in another spot, all the apartments in another spot. We separated all these things. And 1974, what we predominantly did was zoned most of the community for single-family homes. That worked at that point in time. But what has happened over the decades is we've built predominantly one housing type in our community, single-family homes. And in today's economy, for whatever reasons it might be, that's not the type of housing we need. And so we've got predominantly one housing type, but it doesn't match what the economic needs are of our community. And so part of that was definitely the zoning. Planners now know that primarily single-family only zoning has had negative impacts over the decades of communities, and we're starting to find ways to get more types of housing into our codes, which will allow more types of housing to be built and better address the housing needs of our communities.
What time interval is our new zoning going to be revisited?
I mean, right now, in the immediate near term, in the few months, we hope once a year.
Okay.
We're coming back not with major revisions, but with what we call maintenance updates. And so we're always learning how the code is applied. As people come in with projects, we learn what's working, what's not working. Things don't work out the way we intend them to all the time. Once a year, the hope is come back with maintenance updates. And then generally speaking, what we'll do is we'll revisit our community vision once every 5 years. And that might trigger a more policy-related update on a 5-year cycle. But at any point in time, we might realize that, oh boy, there's something big going on that needs to evolve and change, and we need to make a tweak or a change. But zoning isn't supposed to be static, and I think some people think that, like, well, my zoning is this and it will always be this. That's not the case. Zoning is supposed to evolve over time. And sometimes those changes for a neighborhood might be very, very small, even over a 50-year period, but sometimes it might change in more significant ways.
So there's potentially a little bit of circularity here. 1974 set up a zoning based on segregated uses. If we look at what neighborhoods looked like coming out of the 1950s and 60s, see neighborhood schools, neighborhood bars, neighborhood cafes, neighborhood grocery stores were really common. And it seemed like there was a shift from the idea that a household would have one car and these necessities of life you should be able to walk to got changed in the 1970s. Do you know we're going to really segregate uses, the assumption being that it's socially acceptable, it's totally fine, that you would drive to commercial, drive to school, drive to all these places. And looking at this new zoning, I'm thinking specifically around the Swetupcane area, it seems like we've circled back a bit to how can we make a neighborhood a place where a lot of the things you need you can walk to or get to on a bike or even very short order instead of driving across town? And it's the integration of uses as opposed to the segregation of uses. And does that feel accurate, or am I just reading something into this?
No, that's what people in this community were looking for when we talked about the community vision, when we developed what do we want to be. We want more of those things, not less. And so that's why our zoning reflects that. When we were describing it, when we were going through the process and trying to visualize it for people, what are we talking about when you're talking about mix of housing types, mix of uses? I would point to the area around Orange Street Food Farm. That's a part of Missoula that developed largely prior to modern zoning codes. And just in the few blocks around Orange Street, you have apartments, you have single-family homes, big single-family homes, little single-family homes. You have services, a grocery store. All
Schools
of that
and parks.
That neighborhood is arguably, for a lot of people, one of the most desirable neighborhoods in the community.
So, Andrew, by that token, in some respects, we, through our new zoning code, are encouraging a development pattern that evolved and sprung up when there was no zoning. So could that be a counter-argument for why have zoning at all if what we're trying to get back to is a state that kind of sprung up organically without that regulatory mechanism?
Yeah, I mean, there was zoning when that area developed. It was just very, very simple, much more simple zoning. But I mean, we've also changed dramatically as a community. I think the biggest difference is when that neighborhood developed, everyone didn't own a car, and cheap land. The car enabled all the urban sprawl that we see today, and so it has changed the calculus quite a bit.
So I want to come back to something that you hit on a little bit earlier in terms of this tendency in zoning from bygone days, which bygone days were within this calendar year before we updated our zoning, where there has been this tendency to try to segregate uses, exclude certain housing types in some areas and not in others. Can you speak to anything specific in our new zoning code that is encouraging higher density development, maybe more broadly than what we saw previously?
Yeah, and so in the code doesn't necessarily look at it as like higher density. What it focuses more on housing types. If you compared our old code to our new code in terms of what types of housing were allowed, our old code only thought about single family home, a duplex, and big apartment buildings. Those were the three housing types that were anticipated in our old code. But if you looked around Orange Street Food Farm, you're going to see tons of other types. You're going to see townhomes, row homes. You're going to see
ADUs.
Yeah, all those things is
accessory
now,
dwelling units. Oops, I can't. Yeah, forgot the acronyms.
The new code anticipates a huge spectrum of different housing types, from ADUs, accessory dwelling units, to duplexes, to small apartment buildings, to courtyard developments, to tiny homes, big apartment complexes, townhomes. My grandma owned a bar and lived on the flat atop in Dubuque, Iowa, and so that's allowed in the code again. That wasn't allowed.
Why wasn't it allowed?
Know.
What was the reasoning?
Separation of uses. I think it was considered all the commercial should go over there, and yeah.
So part of the big change we alluded to is around housing and in our economy. All across America, in places where people want to live, we've seen over the last couple of years the cost of housing just skyrocket. Rental vacancies drop to near zero. The phrase housing crisis is used all over the place. It's not just Missoula. It's places like Savannah, Georgia, and Bend, Oregon, and Missoula. What happened? How did we get here, given that this isn't specific to one spot? It wasn't like, well, they just blew it in Bend. What happened that we ended up in this position?
I mean, the housing market is incredibly, as you know, incredibly complex, and it has local factors that influence and also global factors. And so lots of reasons why, but one story on how we got to where we are today is you actually go back to the Great Recession of 2008 and the housing crash, and we're still living the effects of that recession. Not in terms of a recession, but it's still affecting our housing market today. And how that recession hit the housing market especially hard, in fact, it was the housing market kind of caused the recession. And it decimated the housing industry. So, in some communities, 30 to 40% of the people who worked on construction lost their jobs. And it decimated the whole system around housing. So wiped out developers, wiped out the construction companies, wiped out roofers,
contractors.
Yeah, exactly. Local government was especially hit hard by the recession because You don't have development, you don't need permitters. You don't need people reviewing building permits and permitting subdivisions. And so planners got wiped out. It decimated the system around housing. And then as we've recovered from that recession and we've moved on, we're obviously no longer in the recession. We haven't been for a really long time. That system that was built, because it's not just a industry, it's an entire system of industries that goes into building housing, never fully recovered. It never bounced back to the levels it was once before. The baking industry, which was hit hard, changed their lending practices. There's fewer developers out there. There's fewer contractors out there that are building houses. And after the recession, we never got back to building the number of homes that were actually required by demand. So we've been slowly, over the last decade, underbuilding what was actually needed. It was a slow crawl to this point when, boom, the COVID hit. And for some reason, I don't know why, but COVID made the interest rates just fall to the floor, right? The mortgage interest rates were 1.8%.
I mean, it's part of stimulating the economy. The federal government wanted to make capital more readily available so people would invest in real estate and other businesses to keep our economy afloat, which seemed to make good sense at the time.
But it just created this massive surge in demand for housing.
And I think you mix that with the new virtue of remote work.
So it changed migration patterns.
Yeah.
We're starting to see the data that says people are moving to Missoula, Montana in different levels than we've seen before for different reasons than we've seen before. And Bryce Ward is sharing information that says those people that are moving here make over $250,000 a year. So they're not the teacher at Lowell Elementary School, are they?
We really need to work on making sure people who do essential in-person work have places to live, or we'll be importing those folks.
Yeah.
And that basically means people drive a long way.
So we got this huge surge in demand because of COVID and migration and the low interest rates, yet factories shut down that made hangars. The transportation network that used to bring nails from China stopped bringing nails from China. They stopped making refrigerators and ovens. And so got this huge demand, and the system was maxed out. The system was smaller than it was before the 2008 recession, but the demand was massive, and we could not build enough housing. And if you look at permit data nationally, even though we're record demand, record low interest rates, the number of permits across the country were flat. What that was showing is that the system was maxed. From the boats bringing hangers over and nails over, to the concrete workers, to the framers, to the developers, to the people in the county office permitting development, Northwestern Energy supplying power, everyone was maxed.
And this is happening nationally.
Yeah, it's happening everywhere. It's not just here. What's exasperating it here is that we're dealing with this COVID migration and this influx of people. Right. And our high amenity, really high quality of life community attracts them.
Yep.
Yeah.
So how does zoning then address it?
That's an awesome question. We can't fix a lot of this through zoning, obviously.
Come on.
We can't address supply
Why are you here, Andrew?
lines for China, but what we can do is we can allow our zoning for when the development community can start building more housing. We're opening up the market. We're allowing more opportunities to build more housing types in more locations. And so hopefully...
And those opportunities look like the parking...
Our old code would only allow single-family homes in most districts. Our new code, in any district that you can do a single-family home, you can also do a duplex, and you can also do an ADU. Small change, but a duplex and a house, they're the same. They look exactly the same. There's really no difference in impact. That accelerates as you go into higher density areas where we start to have infrastructure like sewer and water and sidewalks and roads. Then we start to allow triplexes and fourplexes, and then we start to allow cottage courts and small apartment buildings, and then we start to allow large apartment buildings as you ramp up the ladder, right, in terms of density in the different neighborhoods where density is appropriate. And it's going to allow more housing types in more places. It's not going to be a quick fix. It's not going to all of a sudden tomorrow we have thousands of more units, but it's going to allow this slow transition.
Is there a way to have our cake and eat it too? And by that I mean oftentimes these discussions related to zoning and regulation and increasing our supply of housing stock is pitted against other values, other competing values like natural resource conservation or protecting prime agricultural soils. What can you talk about in this iteration of our zoning code that might be an attempt on our part to break down that duality and say we can come close to trying to achieve multiple goals?
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up because that's something that's really important. I think something that we've actually in Missoula County have set up very, very well. We've done a very, very good job about thinking about the different values. The 2019 Missoula Area Land Use Element, which is our vision for the Missoula Valley that we adopted, it engaged, I think it was close to 2,000 different touches within the community, 2,000 different pieces of comment were put together to create this vision, and 2 years of outreach. And what we did was we identified where these different values really are on the landscape. If you think about what the values how they would be reflected in the built or the natural environment. And then we built our zoning code around that. We have identified areas where development really makes sense, and we've enabled with our zoning for that development to occur that in a way that I think will be of a high quality.
What's an example of an area where development makes sense?
Yeah, the East Missoula area along the Highway 200 corridor, we have envisioned a very nice basically Main Street mixed-use area, and we're going to follow that up with infrastructure and create, I think, a really livable, high-quality place.
Are there examples of places where resource protection was really important, and we also simultaneously recognize the need for housing, and we're able to kind of blend the two things?
Yeah, so our rivers, right? During the outreach process, we identified our streams and river corridors as not only important to the community for protecting water quality and recreational values, the really high priorities for people that live here, but we also identified them as basically highways for wildlife. And people want to be able to look out their window and see elk on the side of the hill on Mount Jumbo. That's important. As I point, we're looking up there to see if we can see them right now.
They haven't been very active today.
Yeah, they're usually out in the morning.
What do you mean? I see a 5 point up on the crest.
So we created setbacks from our rivers to protect the hydrological system, the water quality, to the recreational values, but also to keep development off the riverbanks to protect those areas. They're important as highways for wildlife. So that's one example. Another area that we did is out in the Grass Valley area.
That's what I was
where
thinking.
where the primary focus is agriculture. There's whole areas that are primarily zoned for agriculture. It's intended to preserve those systems, agricultural systems in those areas. In those areas, if you wanted to develop, you have to preserve some agricultural land, but you get a bonus. You actually get a extra density to do so.
Are there other places in the state that you've heard of who are doing something as forward-thinking as that?
Yeah, there are other places in the Flathead County uses a PUD process to allow for
PUD
densities.
means?
Planned Unit Development. Thank you for acronyms again. But it's so directly linked to our county priorities, our community priorities, that it's unique in that respect. Yeah, where we've identified local agriculture as such a high importance that we're actually, what we're doing is we're leveraging the development dollar to preserve agricultural land in a way that gives the development dollar a benefit.
And so what sort of feedback have you received from the development community?
On the bigger code, yeah. We've only had half a building season, and so
early,
I would love to be able to point to some specific examples of buildings being constructed to be like, that's what it will look like under the new code.
It's too early.
But it's too early for that. But the first line of using a code, and when it comes to larger projects, is an architect. And so we've been getting feedback from the architects that have been using the code, and they are happy. They feel like, for an architect who knows how to read codes, they feel like it's really easy to understand and decipher. They understand what we're trying to accomplish, what the vision is, and that's a really important thing. We are finding little things that need to be tweaked, which is actually was always the game plan, that we would come back and tweak it. But overall,
what's the latest tweak, or just to give listeners an idea of what's tweakable?
Our landscaping standards, there's a couple catch-22s in there that we didn't quite identify until we started using it. Those types of things just cause headaches for the developer. They cause headaches for us, the people administering the code. They don't necessarily affect the outcome of the project, but it just makes it a little bit more complicated than it needs to be. So we can fix those little problems, and then it'll be much more straightforward. We'll still get the good outcomes that we're looking for. I could waste way more time on this subject.
Can we brag about Andrew a little bit? Because you're kind of like nationally known and celebrated. And I would love to be able to do that, but I don't have the right words.
I think you just did.
But I just want Tip of the Spear listeners to understand what a treasure we have in Andrew Hagemeier. I don't even know all the letters that go after your name. So, yeah, can you let folks know kind of where you've come from? And
Oh, yeah, I'm originally from Missoula. I grew up here, but I did go away to go to graduate school and get a degree in planning. Moved back to Montana, and I've been traveling around the state in different communities. And Missoula can be a hard community to get back into. Once I finally had enough letters behind my name, I was able to get a job here and move back home. Yeah, I've worked in the public and nonprofit sector and private sector planning across the state. And as a planner, I feel lucky to work here because the community values the importance of planning. Then we have, you're giving me praise, I have to give you praise. You have the vision, the commissioners have the vision to allow us to have such a cutting edge code where other communities might have been a little bit more nervous about it. Our code really is, these aren't accolades for me, they're accolades for all of us, including the community members who participated. It really is, I think, right now, the most cutting edge code in the state of Montana. And not that it's a competition, but right now I think we're at the top.
We will take
not just Montana. I mean,
we will take
again,
that.
Yeah, we'll take that. But also the national recognition of these efforts and your work.
We are lucky to have you, Andrew. And before we close, as we do with all of our guests, we would love it if you could maybe share with us some nugget of wisdom or a good book you've been reading. Or
right now, for fun, I'm reading The Immortal Irishman, which is a book about Thomas More. And it is amazing. And
his story,
a lot of people don't know who Thomas More is.
It's wild.
Yeah.
Wild.
Yeah, but if you live in Montana, you have to read this book.
I'm sorry, what was the title again?
The Immortal Irishman.
Okay.
I mean, there's a bar across the street from us right here named after him, the Thomas More Bar.
And there's a great exhibit at the Fort Missoula Historical Museum, too, on Thomas More.
Yeah. When I lived in Helena, his house was just 2 houses down the street from me.
Oh, wow.
Of course, he didn't live there at the time, but...
Well, thanks, Andrew, for joining us today. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to the Tip of the Spear podcast. If you enjoy these conversations, it would mean a lot if you would rate and review the show on whichever podcast app you like. And if you know a friend who would like to keep up with what's happening in local government, be sure to recommend this podcast to them. The Tip of the Spear podcast is made possible with support from MCAT, better known as Missoula Community Access Television, and our staff in the Missoula County Communications Division. If you have a question or topic you'd like us to address on a future episode, email it to communications@missoulacounty.us. And to find other ways to stay up to date with what's happening at Missoula County, go to missoula.co/county updates. And thanks for listening.